So one of the things we're doing on these podcasts is to give students a sense of what to look for when they start reading a book. So what we maybe would want them to think about or pay attention to in terms of what they can then bring to a university seminar, or what we might be teaching them about. So could you riff for a couple of minutes on what you would suggest students should look for when they're reading your book?
So one thing I think when students are reading any book is that one thing I think is really important is to allow yourself to just notice what you're interested in. Because I think that I've talked to students sometimes before where they almost tense up too much when they feel I've got these list of kind of topics, as it were, or themes I should be looking for in this particular text. I remember one student sort of making a joke about this, that she got to a point where she was reading Pride and Prejudice, where she was just sort of underlining things and writing pride and another bit and prejudice and and all those sorts of things. And actually the thing that we need to leave space for, I think, is the things that we're noticing sometimes without even noticing that we are. So I've said to students, sometimes if you just as it were, put an asterisk next to the things that you're really struck by as you read in a chapter, and then go back to that chapter and pick out those things, you may find that they're connected in a way that you hadn't sort of consciously noticed as you were reading, and that you're attending to something in the writing that maybe even the writer isn't really aware of. Actually, there's a kind of theme being played out there that the writer hasn't noticed too. So I think a really important part of the reading process like that is trusting your own instincts in a way about what you notice, and not trying to kind of force immediately what connects those things you're interested in together.
Brilliant. That's really useful for kind of general reading. Yeah, that's a really good reminder. I mean, not wanting to constrain students with specific themes, is there anything more specifically related to your book that you would encourage students to, or question, or something that you think might be useful just to encourage them to think about while they're reading it?
Well, one thing I thought about loads when I was writing it is the kind of question of whose story it is. So, I'd spent one semester teaching at Al-Quds. I'd obviously been for a couple of other visits, but my time there was quite limited. I learned some basic Arabic while I was there, but I was conversing with people in English, which obviously limits in a sense some of what you get to know. And so I had a sort of challenge, I think, around what authority do I have to write about all of this? Whose lives and stories am I writing about, and what can I kind of say about them? And I had that challenge partly with my students and my colleagues at the university, but also I wanted to write a bit about my family history. So the other thing that the book is about is the fact that my paternal grandparents were lifelong Zionists, very committed to the state of Israel. And I felt that I needed to tell a bit of their story, but I wanted to try and do it on their terms. So I end up quoting some things that my grandmother Liesl said in an interview my father did with her. And I think one of the things I'd sort of be interested to know what students and readers think of the book as they go along is how all of that plays out. Kind of whose story do you hear as you're reading? Whose story do you want to read more of? Who else should write another book that's a fuller account of life at Al-Quds? And how do those kind of different stories in the book fit together?
Brilliant. That's really helpful. I mean, I think something you've already touched upon as well is the sense in which maybe students' views of these different literary texts, Shakespeare's texts, some of them they may not have read, but some of them might be very familiar with. Also thinking about how the experience you write about and this different context maybe gets them to think differently about their own assumptions and presumptions about things they've already read. So I think that's a really interesting part of the book as well, is having this kind of test case of a different situation where things we think we know, like Romeo and Juliet, are challenged and
And it's worth saying, I went into my teaching at Al-Quds thinking, I'm not sure this is going to work. and also in a way thinking, why is there an English literature syllabus at Al Quds University? Why isn't it comparative literature? Where are the kind of Palestinian authors, those kind of things? And that all sorts of colleagues within the department, they were exploring that and teaching Palestinian texts alongside as well. But the thing that was really heartening in a way about the whole experience was, I think some of my students were equally cynical when we kind of set out. But I felt like between us, we kind of found a way of saying, well, let's kind of take these texts and test them against your experience, as Palestinians in this particular context in the West Bank, and find what you like and don't like and what seems to still have value. And I think both they and I were surprised in a way how much we were able to kind of get out of the text then, on those terms that we were looking at. So I actually found it a really exciting experience for thinking about the fact that English literature is relevant and does all sorts of things for us, including in contexts that might seem unlikely.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you, Tom.